Stop everything right now. What you are about to discover will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about the Middle East conflict. There is a 4,000-year-old biblical secret that the media will never reveal to you. A secret so powerful that it explains exactly why Jews and Arabs are at eternal war. And the most shocking part, the Bible has already revealed how and when this conflict will end. Did you know that two brothers who lived thousands of years ago are truly responsible for all the wars we see on the news today? Every time you turn on the television and see another bomb exploding in Gaza, another attack by Iran, another war in Syria, it all started with one family. If you want to understand what's really happening in the world, pay close attention right now. Isaac and Ishmael. Two names you need to engrave in your mind right now. Why? Because these two brothers, sons of Abraham, are literally the fathers of this entire conflict. Isaac, the patriarch of the Jews. Ishmael, the patriarch of the Arabs and Muslims. And here's the secret that will leave you speechless. There's an ancient Jewish principle called Maseh Avot Siman Labanim, which means the deeds of the fathers are prophetic signs for their children. In other words, what happened to these two brothers 4,000 years ago is happening exactly today in Israel and the Muslim world. Interestingly, Christianity speaks of a similar idea, known as typology, which the Apostle Paul used to reveal future events through Old Testament stories. Scholars have applied both methods to understand Israel's conflict with Muslim nations, and the results are truly chilling. I'll prove it to you right now. Isaac and his mother, Sarah, symbolize the people of Israel. Meanwhile, according to Muslim tradition, Ishmael and his mother Hagar represent the Muslim people. When you look at it from that perspective, everything fits together perfectly. It's as if history is repeating itself before our eyes. The conflict begins with a divine promise. Abraham receives a blessing for his descendants. God says, "I will make you a great nation, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." But there is a devastating problem. His wife, Sarai, is barren. She cannot bear children. In those days, a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children, making her infertility a constant source of shame and humiliation. Later, God would change her name to Sarah, which means princess. But to Sarah, this name seemed like a cruel joke. How could she be a princess if she couldn't even provide Abraham with an heir? Time passed relentlessly. As they grew older, God's promise of a child seemed increasingly impossible. Sarah sank into despair. It was she herself who proposed a solution to Abraham, rooted in the customs of the time. She said, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and lie with my servant." She gave her servant Hagar so that Abraham could have a child with her. It was an act of utter desperation. But this solution soon caused new and terrible problems. Sarah, feeling inferior, began treating Hagar cruelly. Pregnant and humiliated, Hagar did the only thing she could: flee to the desert. Alone in the wilderness, her future seemed completely hopeless. But in her darkest hour, it wasn't death that found her, but a divine encounter. An angel of the Lord appeared at a desert spring and spoke to her directly. First, he gave her a command and a blessing. "Return to your mistress and submit to her. I will multiply your descendants until they are beyond number." So he called his son. He will be called Ishmael, which means God hears, for the Lord has heard your suffering. And here Genesis introduces a prophecy that explains our current times, describing Ishmael's character in a way that would forever mark his descendants. Listen to this very carefully. A man will be like a wild donkey. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Let's reflect on this for a moment. This ancient phrase describes today's headlines word for word. It may sound offensive, but let's not forget that Ishmael was blessed by God. What does it mean to be a wild donkey? It's not an insult. In ancient times, the wild donkey was the ultimate symbol of untamed freedom, a fiercely independent spirit that submitted to no one and roamed freely. This prophecy described a people destined to survive against all odds, but also to live in a state of almost constant conflict. Hagar returned and gave birth to her son, whom Abraham named Ishmael. This child would become the patriarch of the Arab people, from whom Islam would later emerge. Finally, after so many years of waiting, Abraham held in his arms the proof that God's promise was real. Imagine the patriarch's relief and joy. For 13 long years, Ishmael had been his only son, his firstborn, the center of his world, and the heir to all his plans. In this child, Abraham saw the future of a mighty nation. The prophecy described Ishmael as a wild donkey, a fiercely independent spirit, difficult to tame. Today, many see this trait in the pride and resilience of the Arab nations. But the prophecy had two sides. It also warned that his hand would be against everyone, and everyone's hand would be against him. Tragically, this prediction of endless conflict resonates on two fronts that are painfully evident today. The prophecy was not limited to external enemies. The history of the Islamic world has been marked by deep internal divisions, particularly between the Sunni and Shia branches. Modern wars, such as those in Syria and Yemen, are tragic examples of this fraternal struggle, reflecting the warning that Ishmael's hostility would be directed against everyone, including himself. But the prophecy sheds even more light on the roots of the conflict with Israel when Isaac was born. Years had passed. Sarah was already 90 years old and had lost all hope in God's promise. She had resigned herself to the idea that her legacy would continue through Ishmael. She felt that God had abandoned her. But one day, suddenly, 3 mysterious visitors appeared at Abraham's tent. While Abraham, then 99, was offering them hospitality, one of them told him incredible news. "I will surely come to you, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah heard the conversation from inside the tent and laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of bitter disbelief. She no longer dared to hope. Abraham's reaction was also surprising. When God confirmed that the covenant would come through this new son, his first thought was for Ishmael. Instead of celebrating, he fervently implored God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live under your blessing." This was the reaction of a heartbroken father who loved his firstborn and feared the coming conflict. Despite everything, God kept his word. Sarah gave birth to a son, and Abraham named him Isaac, which in Hebrew means, "he will laugh." This name would forever remind him of his parents' incredulous laughter. For a while, there was joy in the camp, but tension was growing dangerously. The conflict erupted during the celebration of Isaac's weaning. Sarah saw Ishmael mocking his little brother. Here we encounter an important linguistic detail. The Hebrew word for mockery has the same root as the name Isaac. Ishmael wasn't just joking. He was challenging Isaac's place as heir, as if to say, "I am the firstborn, the true heir." For Sarah, this was the final straw. Her reaction was swift and ruthless. She demanded of Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share the inheritance with my son Isaac." The Bible says, this troubled Abraham deeply because of his love for his son. His heart was broken. God told him to listen to Sarah, but he also promised to make Ishmael a great nation. Although this hurt him deeply, Abraham obeyed. The next morning, he gave Hagar and Ishmael bread and water and sent them off into the desert. That farewell marked the physical separation that confirmed the beginning of a spiritual division. A father had to choose between his sons. Abraham's anguish at expelling his son Ishmael reflects the historical wounds that both peoples carry today. For many Muslim and Palestinian countries, the creation of Israel in 1948 and the displacement of its population was a catastrophe. They refer to it as the Nakba, the catastrophe. This catastrophe is the modern version of the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael into the desert. God himself had promised Abraham to bless Ishmael after learning of the patriarch's devotion to him. Suddenly, a baby is born, and overnight, his future disappears. Isaac's birth didn't mean sharing the inheritance. It meant losing everything. It's not simply a matter of jealousy. For Ishmael, Isaac's existence meant the disappearance of his own identity. Today we see the parallel. The existence of Israel is interpreted as the disappearance of Muslim identity in neighboring countries. Sarah's demand that this son cannot inherit with mine resonates in the most radical discourses today. For example, when Iranian leaders call for the destruction of Israel, A text cited in Iran's charter includes a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that incites violence. This saying, called a hadith, states that the final hour will not come unless Muslims fight against Jews, and Muslims kill them until the Yawmai. Jews hide behind a rock or a tree, and a rock or a tree says, "Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." But this hadith, mentioned in the letter from the Palestinian political authority known as Hamas, continues in an even more revealing way. The text adds that all rocks and trees will betray the Jews, with the exception of the boxthorn. Tradition associates the boxthorn with the Jewish tree. A few years ago, a Palestinian imam quoted this same hadith during an event. He stated that Jews know this prophecy, and for this very reason are planting thousands of thorn trees in their settlements, so they have somewhere to hide when the time comes. Despite the painful separation between Isaac, representative of Israel, and Ishmael, representative of the Arab peoples, God had a plan for both of them. But the plans were different. To understand why Ishmael's blessing differs from Isaac's, we must first understand the most important aspect of this story, the covenant with God. Most importantly, only Isaac received the covenant. A covenant is deeper than a simple promise. It is a binding commitment, a sacred and special relationship between God and a chosen people. Through this covenant, God promised Abraham a unique relationship, and through him, blessings that would flow to all his descendants. But why Isaac and not Ishmael, the firstborn? The answer is a divine decision that we cannot fully understand, and God is very explicit about it. Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. Later he reaffirms, for through Isaac your descendants will be reckoned. This decision establishes a central idea in the Bible. Divine election is not based on human merit or order. Ishmael was born from the human plan and effort of Sarah and Abraham. Isaac, on the other hand, was born by a miracle, by God's direct intervention in two elderly and sterile bodies. The spiritual covenant is linked to a miracle, not a human plan. Ishmael receives the blessing of earthly greatness. Isaac receives the covenant to be part of God's sacred history. The concept of being the covenant people and the chosen people has been central to Jewish identity throughout history. It has been a source of pride, a source of survival, and at the same time, a source of conflict with a world that often rejects this idea. But God makes it clear that although Ishmael is not the son of the covenant, he is not beyond his care. Before the expulsion, when Abraham pleads for his firstborn, God responds directly with a promise of greatness. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him, make him fruitful, and multiply him greatly. This promise is dramatically fulfilled in the desert after Hagar and Ishmael were expelled from Abraham's camp. When Hagar and young Ishmael were about to die of thirst, an angel of God intervened. He not only showed them a well of water to save their lives, but also repeated the blessing. Do not be afraid, for God has heard the boy's voice. I will make him into a great nation. Ishmael's blessing is one of earthly greatness. While Isaac is promised a spiritual covenant, Ishmael is promised power, descendants, and territory. He becomes the father of 12 princes, paralleling the 12 sons of Jacob who would form the 12 tribes of Israel. Some see the fulfillment of this promise in the rise and expansion of the Arab peoples. Over the centuries, the Arabs developed great empires, a rich culture, and enormous global influence. But surprisingly, the Quran and the Torah present different versions of Abraham's life. The struggle between Abraham's children continued after their separation in the sacred texts. The struggle over inheritance became a battle over who would tell the true story of God. Islam firmly maintains that previous sacred texts, such as the Jewish Torah, have been altered by people over time. Therefore, the Quran is presented as the final and correct message from God. In the Bible, Abraham's greatest test of faith comes when God asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac. It is a pivotal moment that seals the covenant. But in Islam, the story changes completely. Islamic tradition says that the son Abraham was going to sacrifice was not Isaac, but Ishmael. What is the reason for this change? Why is it so important? because being the son of sacrifice makes you the most important spiritual heir. By placing Ishmael in this role, Islam makes him the protagonist of the greatest act of faith. This changes the spiritual heritage through his lineage, from which the Prophet Muhammad descends. This is no small change. It is a way of affirming that the true heritage of the covenant belongs to them. Interestingly, the Quran does not mention the name of the sacrificed son, but Islamic scholars have identified him as Ishmael. This creates an important difference. Judaism and Christianity continue the story through Isaac. Islam, on the other hand, sees itself as correcting this narrative and considers Abraham and Ishmael the founders of its holiest site, Mecca. This battle to determine whose story is true has had real and violent consequences. The dispute over holy sites in Jerusalem is a clear example. The holiest site for Jews, the Temple Mount, is exactly the same place where two of Islam's most important mosques stand today. It's like seeing one plant superimposed on another. Controlling this place becomes a symbol of which religion is the right one. A fascinating detail that further intensifies this idea is what lies just beneath the dome of the rock, Jerusalem's Golden Mosque. There lies a stone known as the foundation stone. In Jewish tradition, this isn't just any rock. They believe it's the spiritual center of the world, the place where Adam was created, where Abraham prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and where the most sacred part of Solomon's temple was located. In Islamic tradition, this same rock is the place from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey. It's the same physical location, the same rock, but with two contradictory stories. It's not one story superimposed on the other. It's two sacred texts colliding at the same point. Another fascinating detail is the famous Wailing Wall. Many believe it to be a wall from the ancient Jewish temple, but it is actually the last remaining retaining wall of the Temple Mount complex. For Jews, it is the closest place they can go to pray at their ancient holy site, a symbol of both mourning and hope. For Muslims, this same wall is known as the Wall of Barak, where Muhammad tied his winged steed before ascending to heaven. That's why control of Jerusalem is so fiercely contested. They're fighting not just for territory, but for control of history itself. It's another chapter in the long and painful struggle to determine which story, that of Isaac or that of Ishmael, has the ultimate right to the holiest place on earth. But the prophetic interpretation of the end of the conflict is not bitter. On the contrary, even if it seems impossible, reconciliation does exist. After all, in the history of conflict, the Bible presents a surprising scene that offers hope. When Abraham dies, the text says something crucial. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. After decades apart, without speaking to each other, Isaac and Ishmael reunite to bury their father. At that moment, they are just two grieving sons. A key detail, according to Jewish tradition, is the order of the names, Isaac and Ishmael. That Ishmael, the eldest, allowed Isaac, the heir, to be named first is considered a grand gesture of acceptance and reconciliation. This act is considered a sign to the children, a prophecy that peace is possible. Jewish tradition interprets this as a sign that in the future, Ishmael's descendants might be reconciled with Isaac's. The burial demonstrates that despite everything, God has not abandoned Ishmael and that both remain children of Abraham. This hope is based on divine blessing for both brothers. While the spiritual covenant was with Isaac, the promise to make Ishmael a great nation was never revoked. Today, although we are still far from resolving the conflict, some events have been interpreted as the beginning of mutual understanding between Jews and Muslims. Amid news of war and tensions with Iran, something seemingly unthinkable has happened. A direct echo of that burial where Isaac and Ishmael remained united. In recent years, several Arab nations such as the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have decided to do something different. They have signed peace agreements and normalized relations with Israel. The most curious and revealing aspect is the name they chose for these treaties, the Abraham Accords. For the first time in decades, modern diplomacy did not focus on the conflict, but rather deliberately invoked the common father of Jews and Muslims. It was a public acknowledgement that, despite theological and political differences, their origins are the same. Another little-known example of reconciliation is that the deepest and most mystical branches of both religions, the Jewish Kabbalists, and the Muslim Sufis often found understanding and a nearly identical language. Their goal was not to prove that their religion was the correct one, but rather they shared the same objective: to dissolve the ego in order to unite with the divine. Sharing the same purpose, they spoke a very similar spiritual language. Both systems describe the soul's journey in a similar way. Both Kabbalah and Sufism view life as a journey of the soul ascending through different spiritual levels or worlds to draw closer to God. Both describe God as an infinite and incomprehensible light, and humankind as a spark of that divine light yearning to return to its source. The language of love is central to both traditions. They speak of a burning love for God that transcends all other feelings, a love that seeks total union. The common principle is clear. When the search becomes personal and spiritual, labels like Jew or Muslim pale before the experience of the sacred. In a sense, both mystics achieved what politicians often fail to do. They met at Abraham's tomb, recognizing that they were both seeking the same and unique God of their common ancestor. If they have so much in common, how could they have had so many conflicts throughout history? Because, as we said before, the echo of the Father's actions resonates in those of his children. We see two paths in this story, one of endless conflict and one of difficult human reconciliation. But the Bible presents a third way, a solution that depends not on politics or men, but on divine intervention, the coming of Jesus. The Christian faith presents Jesus not as a mere prophet, but as the definitive solution to the problem of human division. How does Jesus resolve the conflict? The central idea is that Jesus doesn't take sides in the struggle between Isaac and Ishmael. Instead, he creates a new family where these old identities are no longer the main source of division. The Apostle Paul writes that Christ is our peace, who has made both peoples one, breaking down the dividing wall of hostility. This wall of separation represents historical and religious hostility. According to Christianity, by uniting with Christ, a person receives a new identity that transcends their earthly identity. They are no longer primarily Jewish or Arab, a descendant of Isaac or Ishmael, but part of a new spiritual family. When does this reconciliation take place? This is a crucial question. According to this perspective, reconciliation has two stages. The first takes place in the present. Peace and unity begin now in the hearts of those who accept this path. It manifests itself in communities of believers of Arab and Jewish origin who, despite the political conflict surrounding them, already live as brothers and sisters in faith, demonstrating that it is possible to overcome division. However, the complete and final resolution of the global conflict is considered a future event. The Bible teaches that this will be fully achieved with the return of Jesus, known as the Second Coming. At that time, he will establish a definitive and lasting peace on earth. How will Jesus achieve this? The Bible explains that this peace is achieved by creating a new humanity. The Apostle Paul, in a passage that reflects the idea of tearing down the walls of hostility mentioned in the sources, explains that Christ came to abolish enmity, to create within himself a new humanity from both, thus achieving peace. This hope connects with ancient messianic prophecies that appear in the Old Testament and speak of a future time when the wolf will dwell with the lamb and will not harm or destroy on all my holy mountain. But this is not the only prophecy that speaks of Christ as the one who resolves the conflict between Jews and Muslims. The prophecy of the Prince of Peace, also written by Isaiah, is fundamental to understanding the solution proposed by Christianity. This title signifies that Jesus' primary mission was not to be an earthly king who won wars, but to bring inner and spiritual peace. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of his government and of his peace there will be no end. To break the cycle of hatred that began with Ishmael and Isaac, Jesus introduces a principle that is a true spiritual revolution, an idea that goes against all Jewish and Muslim logic. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Which path will Abraham's children choose? The desert of hostility or unity at their father's tomb? If these passages have interested you, prepare yourself, because what you've just seen is only the beginning. Islam also narrates the life of Jesus, but in a different way than Christianity, and the differences are striking. Understanding these differences is crucial to understanding the worldviews of Muslims and Christians. What you'll discover in the following video will completely change your perspective on the global religious conflict. Leave your comment right now about what shocked you most about this revelation. And if you want to continue discovering the secrets the media will never tell you, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss a thing. The truth is being revealed, and you should be prepared.